John Constantine, once a renowned exorcist, now voluntarily checks himself into a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Beyond enduring daily high-voltage electroshock therapy, John seeks guidance from a psychiatrist. He withstands all this because of a past misstep. In an attempt to rid a young girl of a vengeful spirit, John summoned a demon too powerful to control, and before he could contain it, the girl was dragged into hell. Since then, John has abandoned his role as an exorcist. At the psychiatric hospital, he uses electroshock therapy to numb himself, resigning to live out his days in despair. But the appearance of a couple of cockroaches puts him in the middle of a supernatural event once again. Following the direction of the cockroaches, John finds himself in a classroom. There, a woman is writing on the wall. John immediately steps forward to stop her. Upon seeing her white eyes, John realizes she is possessed by a demon. Reluctant to get involved, John was about to turn and leave, but ultimately, he couldn't bring himself to just walk away. He grabs the woman by the head, throwing her across the room, and begins to recite an exorcism prayer. The demon controls the woman, causing her to fly through the air, but she quickly charges at John under the power of the incantation. John swiftly pins her to the ground. As the power of the exorcism prayer grows, a powerful energy emanates from the surroundings. After the demon possessing the woman is successfully expelled, John sees a message written on the wall: "Liv will die." Realizing someone is sending him a message, John promptly leaves the psychiatric hospital. At that moment, a girl named Liv is on her way home when suddenly, cracks appear in the ground behind her. As the collapse grows, a burst of flame shoots up from the pit. Frightened, Liv turns to leave but encounters John arriving on the scene. This is their first meeting. Upon seeing the middle-aged man, Liv instinctively reaches for her pepper spray. Although John insists he means no harm, Liv remains cautious. John, seeing her wariness, reluctantly hands her his business card. After giving her some advice, John instructs Liv to leave while he investigates the pit. As John is making threats into the air, a dark angel named Manny descends, claiming he was sent to assist John. John, however, is reluctant to mix with angels, fearing it would diminish his status in the exorcism community.
What's on the way? We should go. What's on the way?
Meanwhile, Liv has returned to her residence, but as night falls, a sinister gaze reaches her doorstep, only to be blocked by a symbol on the door. The next morning, Liv finds the hallway filled with police, her neighbor mysteriously dead at home. Shocked, Liv discovers the symbol on the door and immediately seeks out John. John explains that the symbol is a protective sigil, drawn by his friend Chaz. John's concern for Liv's safety stems from a promise made to her dying father. John hands Liv a pendant, a keepsake from her father. Just then, a truck charged straight towards the adjacent company, crashing exactly into Liv's office. Upon seeing the face of the driver, Liv realizes it is her deceased neighbor. John, sensing something is amiss, as demons generally don't appear during the day, begins to question the entity within the woman. The demon inside her does not respond but roars twice before departing. As enemies continue to target Liv, John's anger grows, and he decides to take Liv to a remote area. John determines to show Liv the true nature of the world. As they hold the pendant together, the sunny world around them suddenly changes color. Spirits and shadowy figures fill the sky, and bound souls appear on the roads, all searching for a way to leave. As Liv looks around at her new surroundings, a truck drives by on the other side of the tracks.
Let go! There's a train coming. What are you doing? There's a train coming!
Chaz was just fiddling with the radio when suddenly a truck slammed into their car, flinging John through the air with tremendous force. When John picked himself up from the ground, he found both Chaz and Liv trapped inside the car. Suddenly, the electrical wires on the ground began moving on their own, charging straight toward the two trapped inside. Fortunately, John recited an exorcism prayer just in time, briefly controlling the wires on the ground, allowing Chaz to rescue Liv from the car. But just as they were preparing to flee the scene, the unrestrained wires pierced through Chaz's chest. Liv struggled to move forward to help, but John held her back. He led Liv away from the scene without a hint of sorrow on his face. John took Liv to a basement, a place her father had established before his death, filled with various ancient artifacts. John pulled out a dusty old book, which revealed that the demon pursuing Liv was known as Furcifer, capable of absorbing electricity and controlling lightning in storms. As John pondered how to deal with Furcifer, Liv accidentally pricked her palm on the pendant. When the blood fell down the pendant and onto the map, the blood moved strangely until it came to a stop on Wood Street. John told Liv that this was her innate ability. The spot where the blood gathered would be the site of impending trouble, but they needed to deal with Furcifer first. With a sly grin, he suggested using Liv as bait since Furcifer was after her. They then went to the rooftop of a building. John bribed the security guard there and then took out a light bulb from his pocket, instructing the guard to notify him immediately if it lit up. After setting up a ceiling circle on the rooftop, John explained that once Furcifer entered the circle, he could use the spell to banish it to hell. Meanwhile, the security guard, distracted by videos in the room, failed to notice the light bulb lighting up. As the lights in the room flickered, the guard, now under Furcifer's control, came to the rooftop in a daze. John pretended to hand over Liv and gestured for the demon to approach. As Furcifer confidently stepped into the circle, John began the exorcism prayer, and white smoke billowed from the guard's body. In the next second, Furcifer transformed into John's likeness. He said with a mocking face, "Your heart lacks the power of firm intention, cannot play the power of the exorcism incantation." As he spoke, Furcifer used nearby electrical wires to ensnare Liv. This is the center of the city and the place with the most electricity. As a flare shot into the sky, Richie, sitting in a car, hacked into the city's electrical system, plunging the entire city into darkness. Before Furcifer could react, John ignited the spell on the ground. Liv seized the opportunity to break free from the wires, but Furcifer inside the formation did not panic at all. He raised his palm and a little girl appeared beside him. This girl was Astra, the one taken by the devil. Furcifer threatened to release Astra's soul if John removed the circle and let him go. Over the years, John had been tormented by guilt over Astra's situation. Now that her soul appeared before him, he didn't hesitate to begin dismantling the ground circle. Just then, through the pendant, Liv discovered that the girl was not the real Astra. She hurriedly relayed this to John. Upon learning the truth, John immediately ceased his actions, and so Furcifer was sent back to hell by the spell. After this supernatural ordeal, Liv decided to leave and start a new life. She asked Ches to return the pendant to John and left behind a map marked with her blood divination. Man just wants to take a hot shower at home, but a lot of oil comes out of the shower head. Then, flames burst forth, quickly burning the man alive in the bathroom while his wife emotionlessly continued cooking in the kitchen. At the same time, John noticed a change in the blood on the map, signaling the emergence of a new demon in the town. Following the map, he arrived at a tavern, a frequent gathering place for coal miners. After some inquiries, John learned that strange occurrences had been happening at the coal mine recently. Sounds of knocking were coming from the depths, and 9 people had already died inside. The man burned to death was Lannis, the head of the mine. After hearing the workers' stories, John sneaked into the mine to investigate. As soon as he entered, something on the ground began to move. Deep inside, John struck a cover with a tool, and soon, knocking sounds responded from the other side. Then, the mine started to shake violently, prompting John to quickly leave the area. John then visited Lannis's home. In the shower head at the scene, he discovered some black liquid. Just as he was collecting the liquid, Lannis's wife appeared behind him. John lied, claiming he was a journalist. During their conversation, he noticed some coal dust on the woman's arm, but since this was a dormitory near the mines, he didn't think much of it. After a brief inquiry about what happened, John went straight home. But now, there was an extra woman in his room. Her name was Zed, a medium, who had come because she had been dreaming of John. This strange phenomenon puzzled Zed, as she felt John must have a special significance for her. However, John was not interested in exploring these issues. He was more concerned about investigating the creature in the mine. During an argument, Zed grabbed John's arm, and suddenly, a wave of loneliness and pain washed over her. Seeing that Zed could sense his deepest secrets, John became somewhat interested in her. John asked Zed to close her eyes and regulate her breathing. Then he poured the collected black liquid onto her hands. Soon, Zed's consciousness was in the bathroom. After waking up, she described the scene she had seen to John. Learning about the bathroom and a cross, John immediately went to a nearby church. Although it was long abandoned, someone had drawn a demonic figure on the wall. He dropped his own blood into a water bottle, recited a spell, and poured the water over his head. As the water slid down, John saw a blackened spirit. But before he could understand the wraith's origins, another collapse occurred in the mine. John tried to get the mine closed by talking to the supervisor, but the supervisor said he was powerless. The decisions were made by the boss. As he spoke, the car doors locked automatically, and a surge of black water erupted from the undercarriage. Suddenly, two black hands reached out from the water and choked the supervisor. Just as John was about to drown, Zed arrived just in time to pry the car door open. Although he narrowly escaped, the supervisor in the car was not so lucky. After this incident, John deduced that the demons were the mythical mine spirits known as Koblinau. Koblinau usually do not harm humans. They knock on the mine walls to warn miners and protect their homes from intrusion. Now, with Koblinau appearing repeatedly on the surface, John suspected someone was manipulating them. They first suspected the church's priest because his son had also died in the mine, but after testing the priest with an exorcism spell, John discovered no demonic presence in him. The priest told John they had overlooked important information. All the deceased were leaders in the mine. It seemed the demon's ultimate target was the mine owner, Thad. At that moment, Thad was inspecting the mine with his son Nathan when a demon suddenly charged at them. By the time John and Zed arrived, Thad was already being choked by the demon. John instructed Zed to draw a rune on the wall while he recited a spell. With the power of the rune, John easily drove the demon away, but Thad was already lifeless. Although Nathan had only passed out, John noticed a demonic handprint on Nathan's face, which immediately reminded him of the marks on Lannis's wife's arm. He had thought Lannis's wife had accidentally touched some coal dust, but now it seemed she was the one controlling the demons. John then returned to Lannis's home and confronted the woman directly about his findings. Realizing her plan had been exposed, the woman no longer hid her intentions and summoned the demon outright. The woman was originally a gypsy, inherently skilled in profoundly dark witchcraft. She had awakened this power within her as a response to the constant abuse and beatings from Lannis. John tried to persuade her to cease her control over the demons and release them. However, by then, the woman had completely lost her sanity. She commanded the demons to surround John immediately. A woman arrived at her friend's recording studio with a record in hand, intent on having its audio analyzed by a computer. Although Jasmine had warned Bernie not to listen to the sound inside before she left, driven by curiosity, Bernie put on the headphones, and instantly an icy chill emanated from inside the headphones. The very next morning, John was informed about the incident, and he immediately took Zed with him to the morgue. John pulled a dried-up hand from his backpack and lit the fingernails with a lighter. As John continuously chanted incantations, the corpses in the morgue began to stir, and Bernie's spirit successfully returned. Knowing this state couldn't last long, John urgently asked Bernie about his cause of death. From Bernie's fragmented responses, John learned that the music on the record was connected to Moonlight Corporation. Subsequently, John and Zed found Marcus, the elderly and now paralyzed owner of Moonlight Corporation. Marcus revealed that the record was made 70 years ago. At that time, a singer had come to his studio, but during the recording session, the temperature inside plummeted to freezing. Soon, a black liquid began seeping from the walls and quickly enveloped the singer's body. As the demon inside the record whispered ominously, the singer was transformed into a pool of blood, and the demon's voice was etched into the record. Frightened, Marcus wanted to destroy the record but failed with every method he tried, ultimately deciding to hide it. A few days earlier, a man named Ian had approached him, expressing a desire to buy the record, so Marcus gave him the address. Armed with the information provided by Marcus, John and Zed quickly located Ian. To their surprise, it was not Ian but his wife Jasmine who had dealt with the demon. Years ago, Ian had tragically developed cancer, and to save him, Jasmine had made a pact with a man named Anton, trading her soul for Ian's health. Now, as the text of the pact began to fade, once it turned into a blank sheet, the demon would fully claim Jasmine's soul. The reason Jasmine sought the record was that Anton had recently contacted her, claiming he could return her soul if he obtained the record. John knew all along that Anton's promises were lies. Soul trades couldn't be broken, or else they would lose their leverage in negotiations with Hell. After learning the location of the transaction from Jasmine, John went there alone. Upon seeing the true mastermind's face, John realized it was Papa Midnight, a notorious voodoo priest with whom he had clashed years ago. Papa wanted the record for its immense power. Before John could confront him, Papa's men knocked him out from behind. When John awoke, he found himself bound to a wire mesh. Papa cut into John's arm with a knife, intending to let him experience a slow death. Meanwhile, Papa's men had gone to Ian's house and forcibly taken the record, but as they were driving back, an invisible force compelled them to play the music inside the record, and instantly, frost began to rise within the car. Elsewhere, John was still bound, awaiting his death. When a drifter was drawn to the scene, John hoped the drifter would free him, but after rifling through John's possessions, the drifter raised a stone to kill him. Fortunately, Zed arrived just in time, drove the drifter away with a club, and quickly freed John, but by the next morning, another tragedy struck a karaoke bar where everyone inside had died violently. A deaf-mute witness described two men who had approached the DJ booth, after which everyone began to harm themselves frenziedly. It seemed these men were Papa's henchmen, now controlled by the record. Zed, using her psychic abilities, saw a white tiger, and nearby was a radio station named The Tiger. John guessed that they would take the record and play it there, so they drove over immediately. John instructed Zed and Chaz to find a way to cut the power while he confronted Papa's men inside the station. As the record played inside, everyone lost their sanity and attacked each other. In the chaos, John was knocked down, and the music invaded his mind. As John lay on the ground struggling in agony, Papa entered with a shotgun and blasted the speakers off the wall. Clearly, Papa was also after the record. As Papa faced off with the men inside, a recovering John began to recite a spell.
Constantine! I drew on the disc's own dark magic.
A man had just left the restroom and began to binge eat and drink voraciously. Not only did he crazily snatch food from others' hands, but he even plunged his hands into a deep fryer to grab the fries inside. When he had eaten and drunk enough and lay down on the floor, countless beetles flew out of the man's mouth, and soon he lost his life and became a dry corpse. These beetles appeared because of an exorcist named Gary. A few days earlier, while wandering in Sudan, Gary had encountered a boy with marks carved on his face. As an exorcist, he instantly sensed something was amiss. The runes signified a binding seal, and he surmised that someone had used the boy's body as a vessel to seal a demon inside him. To help the boy escape his suffering, Gary unilaterally broke the seal and captured the demon in a bottle. He had planned to hand this demon over to John, but unexpectedly, he was stopped at customs. A security officer accidentally dropped the bottle, releasing the sealed beetles instantaneously, and his body became a new vessel for the demon. Seeing this, Gary immediately fled the scene and found John to tell him everything that had happened. By now, the demon had found a new host. The possessed woman, like the security officer, was incredibly agitated. She began a spree of zero-cost shopping in the supermarket, stuffing any edible item into her mouth. This scene left a nearby little boy looking on enviously. The security officer rushed forward and pinned the woman to the ground, but she kept saying how hungry she was and even bit a chunk of flesh off his face. When John arrived after receiving the news, the demon had already left the woman's body. Eyewitnesses reported that the beetles had last entered a delivery man's body, and John immediately went to the delivery company. By the time John arrived, the delivery man had also turned into a mummified corpse. When John reached the cold storage room, he discovered the demon had taken control of another woman, who was frantically gnawing on fresh pork. Seeing this, John took out a pre-prepared bottle and, as he continuously chanted a spell, the woman crawled towards him like a spider. The beetles' power proved too strong, and John had to temporarily lock them inside the cold storage. However, the cold storage wouldn't hold them for long. They needed to quickly understand the demon's origins. To this end, John found a shaman, who, through witchcraft, learned the full story. This demon is known as the Hunger Demon, Nemeth. It emerged from areas ravaged by war where people constantly suffer from starvation. Slowly, Nemeth emerged from the suffering populace, devouring one person before moving to the next. A local shaman, discovering this, used the boy's body as a vessel. He carved runes on the boy's face with a sacred blade and sealed the demon inside him. Originally, as the boy was consumed, Nemeth would also perish, but Gary had disrupted this. Now, they must use the same method to seal Nemeth again. John took Gary to a museum, where they first stole the sacred blade, then found Nemeth feeding. At this point, John told Gary that a live sacrifice was needed, and one of them had to be sacrificed to seal Nemeth. Then, Gary removed his shirt and knelt on the ground, while John stood behind him and began to chant. Soon, Nemeth was drawn out of its host and followed the summons into Gary's body. John immediately used the sacred blade to carve the sealing runes. The intense pain caused Gary to faint, and John then took him back to his residence. As he watched his friends slowly being consumed by Nemeth, John could only sit silently by his side.
Do you think I'm pretty?
Yeah, you're pretty.
Think I'm pretty? Oh. Am I pretty now?
Pretty.
Why don't I make you pretty like me?
This is what happens when you deceive a woman. Misaki was once a very successful model, but now she can only go out wearing a mask. Every time she encounters passers-by when she goes out, Misaki asks them if she is beautiful. If their response does not satisfy her, she takes out the scissors she carries and stabs them to death. Meanwhile, another murder occurred elsewhere. A boy was hitchhiking alone by the roadside, and a passing driver, seeing him, let him into the car, but while they were chatting, Philip's figure suddenly disappeared from the seat, and the next second, Philip appeared in front of the car, his face covered in blood. Panicked, the driver quickly turned the steering wheel, and the car crashed directly into a nearby tree. When the driver crawled out of the car with severe injuries, Philip came up to him but did not help the injured driver and calmly watched him die there. Now, with murders continuously happening in the city, John and his team sprang into action again. They first scanned the crime scene with an energy bracelet, and quickly, the gem on it turned blue. This meant that a spirit had been nearby, suggesting the murderer might not be human. Subsequently, John and his team began investigating the murders. Zed went to Philip's house, where she learned from Philip's grandmother that Philip had been kicked out of the house for using drugs. That night, Philip hitchhiked to the city, where he unfortunately died in a car accident. Meanwhile, John also learned about Misaki's identity. She was once a very beautiful model, but her roommate, driven by jealousy, destroyed her face with scissors. Unable to bear the humiliation, Misaki eventually chose to end her life with an overdose. Philip's grandmother and the roommate initially felt very guilty, but later, they found a medium who successfully communicated with the deceased and even received their forgiveness. And this medium was none other than the voodoo priest, Papa Midnight. At this moment, Papa was conducting a seance. Madeline's husband, Clark, had suddenly died of cancer without a proper goodbye, so she wanted Papa to let her talk to her husband one last time. As Madeline drank the chicken blood from the bowl, Papa began chanting his spell. Soon, Clark's spirit was summoned, but while they were talking, John suddenly appeared and interrupted the ceremony. John told Papa that his magic had gotten out of control, as the spirits he summoned had all come back to life and were now killing humans everywhere. But Papa did not believe John's words, as the two had been adversaries for many years. Just a few days earlier, John had caused him to lose a record, which greatly irritated Papa. He used a drug to knock out John, and then he had his men lock him in the boot before Papa went back to his place. But John's words had planted seeds of doubt, so Papa used the hell phone to contact his sister. He wanted to know if it was true that spirits had been resurrected as humans. Amid the low whispers from the skull, Papa's expression gradually grew serious. The next morning, he went to Madeline's house. Indeed, the spirit of Clark he had summoned the night before had resurrected as a human and was now draining the life force from women. Seeing this, Papa quickly left and went to his car to find John. Now that things were beyond his control, Papa wanted to resolve these spirits as soon as possible. John told Papa that his magic was out of control due to the rise of darkness, and he could help stop it. But after everything was done, he needed to use the hell phone to ask a question. Papa hesitated for a moment but then agreed. But to let these spirits rest, they must burn their bodies at the place of the ceremony. For this, John and Papa began the grim work of digging up graves. That evening, they placed the stolen bodies together, and as John threw a match into the pile, they began chanting over the flames. After the chant, the bodies showed no signs of being burned. Papa thought John's heart was not devout enough, but John believed that Papa had lost the power of the voodoo gods, leading the two to scuffle. After venting their frustrations, John also realized the cause of the failure. He asked a friend to bring the deceased's relatives to the site. It turned out that it was not Papa but the relatives' obsessions that had resurrected the spirits. Because they couldn't let go of the deceased, the spirits refused to be guided to the afterlife. Finally, with Papa's comfort, they were able to let go. Then, John and Papa chanted over the bodies again. After settling this matter, John returned with Papa to his residence. Per their agreement, John could use the hell phone once. He wanted to know the reason behind the rise of darkness, but when Papa asked the question holding the skull, the answer shocked them.
All your efforts are in vain, heralded by someone close to you, someone who will betray you. A darkness is coming.
Pastor Zachary pulled a venomous snake from a box and recklessly began to play with it in his hands. As the crowd watched in astonishment, the snake bared its fangs and bit into Zachary's arm, and soon after, he lay on the ground lifeless. His sister rushed to his aid, but Zachary showed no signs of life. Just as everyone began to mourn, a feather suddenly appeared in Zachary's hand, and miraculously, he came back to life, endowed with some tremendous power. The man dragged his amputated broken leg to Zachary, only to see Zachary's palm gently press the man's chest. The man's broken leg grew out intact. This scene made the crowd all incredibly shocked, and they took this power as a gift from God. As more and more followers were healed by Zachary, his deeds quickly made the newspaper headlines. John, seeing this, immediately sensed something was off, as ordinary humans should not possess such abilities. He and Zed then headed to the church. At that moment, Zachary was preaching God's purpose to the congregation, but he was speaking in ancient Enochian, a language known only to angels. Although John did not understand what Zachary was saying, he knew that no one could use an angel's power unconditionally. Sure enough, when they reached a nearby pond, they discovered that all the fish were dead and the water reeked terribly. To figure out why Zachary possessed angelic powers, John used a ritual circle to summon the dark angel Manny. John told Manny everything happening in the town. However, as an angel, Manny could not interfere in human affairs and left John with a cryptic message.
It would only make sense if you stand facing the sun.
After Manny departed, John had Zed hum an Enochian towards the sunlight. Unexpectedly, this actually worked, and they soon heard a similar chant from nearby. Following the sound, they found a snow-white woman lying under a tree. When the woman stood up and revealed wings on her back, they were shocked to realize she was a true angel. Zed was stunned. They then settled the angel in a farmhouse, where through conversation, they learned her name was Imogen. Imogen was escorting a dying person to heaven when, for some unknown reason, that person pulled a feather from her, causing her to fall to earth. It appeared that the man in the church was the one who had pulled Imogen's feather. Manny also appeared at the scene, seriously telling John that they needed to retrieve the feather quickly, or Imogen would not last long and would die here. John immediately set up a protective barrier outside, then went to Zachary's home. But when John tried to snatch the feather, a powerful force blasted him away. The angelic feather possessed holy power that ordinary people couldn't approach. With no other option, John returned to the farmhouse. After some deliberation, they decided to let Zed try, as she, being a medium, possessed special powers. The next day, Zed, disguised as a believer, found Zachary and successfully took the feather from him during a baptism. Just then, the patients who had been healed suddenly mutated and burst from the crowd, attempting to snatch the feather. John, by the shore, quickly picked up a stick to fend them off. After barely escaping back to the church, John told Zed to take the feather to Imogen while he stayed to block the crowd. But shortly after Zed left, Zachary began to utter some strange words. It turned out that Zachary had once killed a person while drunk driving. Not only had he not stopped to check, but he had also fled the scene. John instantly understood everything. A person burdened with such sin could not possibly go to heaven. This meant that Zachary was in hell at the time, and the Imogen whose feather he had plucked was not an angel. Just as John was about to stop Zed from returning the feather, the mutated being smashed through the church doors. With no other choice, John found himself grappling with them, but outnumbered, he was quickly subdued and pinned to the ground. Suddenly, an invisible force struck, and the mutants returned to normal. Now that Imogen had retrieved her feather, her skin gradually turned from snow white to black. Manny immediately recognized Imogen's true identity. She was a fallen angel cast out to hell by God. Imogen flapped her wings, attempting to leave, but she slammed into the barrier at the door. Unexpectedly, the protective barrier John had set up had now become a prison trapping Imogen. Seeing no other way out, Imogen grasped Zed by the throat.
That I was cast out of heaven for one indiscretion.
What did you do?
I killed a mortal.
Harper! You're the only one who can stop this. You're either in this. No, I can't. You mean you won't? Money!
Although Manny succeeded in killing the fallen angel, he would also face punishment for his actions. John quickly wrapped up the dark heart. Now, with the barrier between hell and the human world weakening daily, and darkness rising, it was only a matter of time. He must prepare for everything that was coming. A man's wife had just given birth in a convent when someone stole their child in the night and murdered his wife in her bed. Sisterin, using a spirit, located John, a longtime friend of hers. The incident caused a change in the crucifix she wore. prompting her to ask John for help in investigating the matter. The next morning, John arrived at the convent with Chaz, setting up a sensory circle at the scene of the crime. Unexpectedly, the demon's power was so strong that the circle ignited as soon as it was activated. However, John still sensed something: the missing infant had not been killed. To find the infant's location, they needed an object that could connect with its soul, and thought of the placenta that had been buried earlier, and so she took John to a tree. As they were digging the soil under the tree, John suddenly noticed fruits hanging from it that resembled human skin. Cutting one open, blood flowed out. At that moment, other fruits on the tree also burst. While they were puzzled, Hugo came out of the house. John explained to Hugo that these fruits were like the forbidden fruit of Eden, suggesting that the kidnapper was a sister of Eve. Suddenly, a phone call interrupted their conversation. Another infant had been stolen. When they arrived back at the convent, they learned that the stolen baby was Hugo's own granddaughter, indicating that the murderer was targeting his family. To find out which sister of Eve was involved, John prepared to use spring water to reveal the perpetrator's true face. He first scattered worms around, then closed his eyes and began chanting. But just as the ceremony was coming to an end, a nun suddenly came running up, and with an anxious look on her face she told John to go back into the house. During their conversation, John noticed the worms in the bowl acting strangely and secretly dumped them into the water. Sure enough, the nun's reflection appeared in the water, revealing her as the thief. Seeing her secret exposed, the nun turned to leave, but John suddenly shouted out her true name.
Lamashtu. Swear to the baby.
Stabbed, Lamashtu bled profusely and fled the area. Afterwards, John informed everyone that Lamashtu was Eve's youngest sister. Although a vampire, she had never been known to kidnap her prey. The continuous theft of Hugo's bloodline must indicate some kind of connection between his family and Lamashtu. Eventually, John and his companions located Hugo's grandmother, who revealed that Hugo's ancestor had been a member of a wicked sorcerer's guild but had left due to family reasons. It appeared that the guild had long been searching for Hugo's family's bloodline. Since they wanted Hugo's bloodline, John decided to directly offer it to them. John smeared Hugo's blood on chicken and wrapped it in white cloth. Once everything was ready, John took out a necklace, an amulet of the demon Pazuzu, whose power could prevent Lamashtu from harming Anne. As the ritual began, Lamashtu quickly arrived, drawn by the scent. She reached past Anne and directly grabbed the chicken from the table. Affected by the blood, Lamashtu saw a baby. However, Hugo, hiding nearby, rushed out despite attempts to stop him, and his gunshot scared Lamashtu away. Lamashtu fled into the nearby sewers with the chicken, and John and his group followed. Soon, John and Anne found the missing infant in a cage. As they prepare to leave with the baby in their arms, Lamashtu recognizes their ruse and angrily blocks John and Anne's way. John, seeing her reaction, held up the infant, knowing its importance to Lamashtu, and threatened her to reveal the Sorcerer's Guild's purpose. Caught off guard, Lamashtu reluctantly disclosed their plan.
We figured out how to bring about. Hell and earth will become one. No more hiding like cowards in the shadows. We live in the open and you'll be the ones hiding. But there'll be no hiding from us. You will be ours.
Ambitious.
No man does.
Just as they thought the ordeal was over, a baby's cry echoed from deep within. A strange creature emerged from the water, which John immediately recognized as the infant-eating monstrosity. The creature's speed was unmatched by any human, as John was unsure how to handle the situation, and suddenly pulled out a gun from her waist.
It will attack you. No price is too high to save the innocent.
The gunshot drew the creature's attention, allowing Anne and the baby to escape. Injured, John watched despairingly as the creature approached him. Realizing his peril, John took out the Pazuzu amulet and unlocked its seal by chanting, pressing it against his arm. When John opened his eyes, Pazuzu had taken possession of his body. The creature sensed Pazuzu's powerful presence and fled. Although John saved his life, his consciousness was at risk of being overtaken by Pazuzu at any moment. Their most urgent task was to perform an exorcism. As they prepared to head to the church, Pazuzu suddenly began to resist fiercely, quickly taking control of John's body. When John regained consciousness, he found himself bloodied in the street, surrounded by dismembered limbs. The arriving police immediately arrested John. To leave the prison quickly, John thought of his former boss, Stanley, hoping Stanley could expedite his release. However, Stanley said it would take some time. Hearing this, John angrily grabbed Stanley by the collar, warning that if he couldn't get out today, the entire prison would face a terrible calamity. Stanley urgently called the guards to take John away. Unknown to John, Stanley had already struck a deal with a coven of dark witches to keep John imprisoned indefinitely. With the deal now sealed, Vicente began sizing up Stanley's body.
Why'd you keep looking at me like that? Measuring.
Meanwhile, John was searching everywhere for usable items, planning to perform an exorcism on himself. But just then, 3 burly men walked in. It turned out that the man John had previously dismembered was their brother, and they had come to avenge his death. Feeling the threat, Pazuzu inside him grew restless again. Although John tried hard to control it, Pazuzu eventually overtook his consciousness. After this incident, John became the de facto leader of the prison. At this time, Chaz and Zed also arrived. To enter the prison smoothly, Zed disguised herself as a woman of ill repute. Chaz, using his resilience, successfully got himself captured by the guards when they met John in the room, and also voluntarily came there. Although and had orchestrated all of this, John did not blame her, understanding that in such urgent circumstances, he would have made the same decision. The group then started the exorcism for John, and acted as the exorcist in her role as a nun, with Zed and Chaz assisting. But when and recited the spell and sprinkled holy water on John, his body showed no reaction. Just then, the security outside was knocked unconscious, and a man in black entered. It was Vicente, who had devoured Stanley. John immediately recognized him. Vicente was the Serpent of Eden, Naash, who had tempted Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Vicente had come to end John's life. However, seeing the mark of Pazuzu on John's arm, Vicente decided to spare him, as John would soon become his ally. As Pazuzu began to forcefully take over, John urgently asked him to kill him. Chaz stepped forward to stop Vicente, who simply broke his neck with a single move. But this distraction allowed an opportunity, and swiftly stabs Vicente in the back with a demon-subduing staff. And instantly his body transforms into a swarm of small snakes that slither away from the scene. Without the staff, they could not kill Pazuzu, and now they could only pray that the exorcism would be successful, and chanted the spell again, and Pazuzu, sensing danger, violently assaulted John's consciousness.
What a failure! Give up like you did when you ran to Mexico! Barely worth his one night of pity.
Pazuzu, inhabiting John's body, taunted him continuously, greatly shaking her inner resolve. With a weak spirit, one cannot fight a demon. Seeing this, Zed quickly came forward to comfort Anne, as she was now the only one who could save John. Should Pazuzu successfully descend upon the world, a tremendous disaster would follow.
John dies, then this demon is released. That failure will be yours, Henry.
Filthy hellspawn! I command you to release your Constantine, this humble servant of God! The nations, return to...
After relentless efforts by everyone, they finally managed to expel Pazuzu's influence. Seeing John awake and joking, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although they narrowly escaped danger this time, John knew it was just the beginning. With even greater threats approaching, Geraldine looked on in terror at the dark mist before her, and soon her doll dropped to the ground. When Chaz returned with a gift, his daughter had already collapsed with blood flowing from her nose. At the same time, many patients with the same symptoms appeared in the hospital. Upon receiving the news, John immediately rushed over and sprinkled revealing powder on the girl's mouth, exposing some black marks instantly. These were traces left when a soul leaves the body. Someone had used black magic to extract Geraldine's soul. Although Geraldine was still alive, her body alone couldn't sustain her for long. To quickly retrieve her soul, John and others went to a place dealing in arms. Fennel here is a psychic. They want to talk to Geraldine's soul with psychic magic. After Chaz kindly greeted Fennel's nose, Fennel readily agreed to their request. Fennel washed his hands and then closed his eyes to chant a spell. As John handed Fennel the girl's doll, he quickly connected with Geraldine's soul through its scent. John urgently asked for her location, but before Geraldine could respond, Fennel's body suddenly levitated.
Who dares speak to one of my stolen souls?
One's taking control of Fennel, and it certainly isn't Geraldine.
It's been a long time. Constantine.
Tell me who you are.
Although they didn't find Geraldine's soul, Fennel left a spell behind before dying. Zed used her abilities to investigate the spell, and her spirit instantly arrived at a train yard shrouded in white smoke. Just as Zed was about to search for Geraldine's soul, a dark figure suddenly appeared behind her, injuring the real-world Zed through her spirit. This indicated that their opponent was a very powerful magician. Following the clues, John and the others arrived at the train yard and immediately saw a lot of experimental equipment. An old man was sitting in a chair watching them. When he removed the hat on his head, John instantly recognized him. The old man, named Felix, was once an apprentice to the strongest black magician but had now set up his own shop as a new magician. Felix had been stealing people's souls because he had found a way to absorb them, increasing his power with each soul he acquired. Upon hearing this, Chaz immediately tries to rush forward to reclaim his daughter's soul, but Felix merely raises his hand and remotely snaps Chaz's bones. Seeing this, John quickly speaks out to stop him. Felix responds, "I can release Geraldine's soul, but you must do something for me." There was a demon stealing Felix's power, and he wanted John to send it back to hell in exchange for the girl's soul. John agreed immediately, and they even signed a magical contract. Afterward, John and the others left the area. John told Chaz to return to the hospital to stay with Geraldine while he and Zed went to the demon's haunting grounds. The terrain was complex, and they couldn't catch sight of the demon. With no other option, they set up a magic circle in an open area. Zed lay in the middle as bait, and as soon as the demon entered the circle, John would be able to send it back to hell. As Zed fell into a magically induced sleep, the demon quickly followed the scent. They were supposed to light the circle to trap the demon, but at the critical moment, the lighter wouldn't work. Reluctantly, John woke Zed and charged at the demon with an electric baton. After successfully killing the demon, John and Chaz found Felix. Unexpectedly, Felix played a word game. Their agreement was to send the demon back to hell, but John had killed it in the human world. So Felix demanded they find another demon. Although John was extremely annoyed, he knew he was no match for Felix and reluctantly agreed to look for another demon. However, Chaz couldn't wait any longer. His daughter's life was at risk, and it was unclear when they would find the next demon, so he decided to save his daughter his way. After knocking John out and putting him in the car, Chaz confronted Felix, offering to trade the 32 souls within him for his daughter's soul. It turned out that Chaz could come back from the dead because he had absorbed someone else's life force. John had cast a protection spell on him while drunk. Unexpectedly, Chaz survived a fire in a bar that night where everyone else died, but he was unharmed. John was very happy when he learned about it. He didn't think that the protection spell he had just cast would actually work. The spell was created by the Archmage Merlin himself. The person being protected can suck the life out of everyone around him after death. Thus, the protection spell not only saved Chaz's life but also allowed him to gain the souls of other victims from the fire. After some losses, there were still 32 souls left in Chaz's body. In order to make Felix believe what he said, Chaz slit his throat in front of him. Shortly after, the bleeding wound healed, and Chaz revived once again. Seeing that Chaz could indeed come back from the dead, Felix immediately agreed to his terms. As long as Chaz is willing to hand over the remaining souls, he will immediately release Geraldine and promise not to bother her for the rest of her life. Hearing this, Chaz extends his hand to seal the deal. Just then, John arrives in time and urges Chaz not to act rashly, warning him that giving up the souls would also lead to his own death. Fearing Chaz might change his mind, Felix grabs Chaz's hand, but suddenly a rope binds them together. In a twist of fate, the mighty dark wizard meets his end on a grenade. A man marries 3 young girls in one day, yet still feels unsatisfied and decides to find another bride, delegating this task to the 3 girls. At that moment, a girl runs away from home and arrives at an amusement park. As soon as Vesta gets there, a homeless man urges her to leave quickly and ominously warns her, "You will die." At that moment, the 3 girls also appear at the park. Seeing them, the homeless man quickly flees the scene. The 3 girls approach Vesta to comfort her, telling her not to be afraid and that they just want to be her friends. During their conversation, Vesta gradually becomes attracted to them. The girls then pull back their collars to reveal strangulation marks around their necks, which they refer to as their wedding rings. They tell Vesta that if she agrees to marry the man, they will become a family and be together forever. Instead of feeling scared, Vesta agrees to marry the man. At that time, John and his team are investigating the reasons behind the girls' disappearances. From the traces appearing on the victims' bodies, they deduce that someone is conducting some sort of ritualistic ceremony. While discussing the case, the body on the ground suddenly sits up and calls out John's name. It turns out that Gary has returned from the dead by possessing the corpse.
There's a price in your head. Big bounty on offer.
At the same time, Papa receives news of a bounty. In order to claim a substantial bounty, Papa transforms one of his subordinates into a zombie. Chanting a spell, he grabs a handful of incense ash from a furnace and then commands the zombie to hunt down John. Unaware of the looming danger, John is searching for clues in one of the girl's homes to understand what the girl experienced before she disappeared. John stuffs her hairbrush and toothbrush into his mouth and sticks his fingers into a smashed lamp. The high voltage allows him to connect with the girl's perspective, where he sees the amusement park and the homeless man, despite the connection causing John significant harm. It helps him pinpoint where to look for the girls. They immediately drive to the amusement park. John enters to scout the area, while Zed and Jim stay outside on standby. As John enters a room designed for escape room challenges alone, a zombie created by Papa suddenly appears. Caught completely off guard, John is swiftly overpowered and loses his ability to fight. At that moment, Papa's voice emanates from the zombie's mouth. As he uses sorcery to share perspectives and communicate mentally with the zombie, John's counterattacks do no harm to the zombie. Instead, he finds himself being overpowered and pinned to the ground by the zombie, controlled by Papa. Just as John is about to be killed, Zed and Jim arrive just in time. The gunshot wounds cause Papa immense pain. Although he tries to endure it to kill John, the zombie's head is blown off by a gunshot. This completely severs their connection. However, Papa does not give up. Using witchcraft, he shares a visual perspective with a crow and sends it out to continue tracking John. Knowing Papa will return, John realizes they must find the girls quickly. At that moment, Zed's psychic vision activates, and she sees a badly injured police officer writing an address on the floor. Before she can examine it closely, a man disrupts her vision with a branding iron. Coming to her senses, Zed quickly writes down the information she saw. Using the reflection in a mirror, they obtain an address and rush to the location. However, they arrive too late. The police officer has already been murdered, leaving no useful clues at the scene. Fortunately, there is only one entrance and exit, so Jim checks the surveillance footage. Meanwhile, John spots the crow outside and knows Papa has pinpointed his location. He decides to stay and confront Papa while sending Jim and Zed to check the surveillance. Sure enough, Papa arrives soon after with a shotgun and immediately fires upon seeing John. For Papa, it's imperative to kill his adversary due to the irresistible bounty offered by the Dark Witchcraft Circle, which promises to lift a curse from his sister. With the sound of a gunshot, blood splatters onto Papa's face. Suddenly, John appears behind Papa and swiftly delivers several punches, knocking Papa down. It turns out the previous John was just an illusion he created to distract Papa. John then knocks Papa unconscious with the butt of the gun and takes his car keys and phone. On the road, John contacts Zed and the others, and upon receiving the killer's address, he immediately drives there in Papa's car. Upon arriving, Vesta is seen in a wedding dress, with the man kneeling before the devil seeking blessings. After this ritual, he prepares to exchange wedding rings by strangling Vesta. Frightened, Vesta knocks over an oil lamp and escapes, but being on the man's territory, she is quickly recaptured. At the same time, John locates the place. In a room, he finds the bodies of the three girls, their bodies bearing signs of torture, filling John with rage and a determination to make the perpetrator pay. While searching the area, John sees the man attempting to harm Vesta. Upon spotting John, the man drops Vesta and tries to flee but is intercepted by Zed and Jim. Though they successfully capture the culprit, John is not inclined to let him off easily. Eventually, Jim unlocks the man's handcuffs. With the sound of a gunshot, the criminal receives his deserved punishment. Afterward, Manny finds John and discusses the impending rise of darkness. Noting that human wickedness is also a great danger, Manny wants John to join him in fighting this war. Although Manny is often reluctant to help, John doesn't care about that. His goal is simply to slay demons and protect humanity. Seeing John's determination, Manny feels very reassured. Manny then finds Papa and personally revokes the bounty on John.